Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar on rebounding from COVID-19 with end-to-end automation. My name is Alex. I'm on the marketing team here at Bullhorn, and I wanted to cover a quick couple of housekeeping items before we begin. All attendees will be muted during today's presentation, but we strongly encourage you to ask any questions in the question pane that's on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll get to as many questions as possible before the end of the session. Today's webinar will be recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording within the next 24 hours, and we should wrap up in about an hour. And with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. On today's call, we have Jason Heilman, who's the co-founder of Herefish by Bullhorn. We have Mark Hummel, our Sales and Strategy Director for VMS, and Kendra Cato, our Director of Enterprise Strategy here in North America. And Kendra will actually be kicking us off today. So with that, I will hand it over to Kendra.
Thanks, Alex. We are really excited for today's webinar. Wanted to quickly run through the agenda, but we have a lot to cover. I'm definitely going to take a look at the latest COVID data we have and some metrics that we track within Bullhorn, and then discuss how customers are leveraging automation today, and do a brief short-term AI review before we get into some of the impacts of COVID. So each year we survey thousands of global staffing and recruitment professionals, and we're really looking to discover their challenges, priorities, and their predictions for the year ahead. So heading into 2020, respondents expressed some concern about the future of the economy, but everyone was largely optimistic. Talent shortage was the #1 challenge by a landslide, and candidate acquisition was the #1 priority. Then everything changed. Over the course of several months, COVID-19 has directly and indirectly altered the outlook of our industry and the world at large in many, many ways. And many firms right now are in dramatically different situations than they were at the beginning of the year. We surveyed nearly 1,000 staffing professionals to find out where the industry stands now and understand what has changed and what hasn't. We've also hosted private roundtable discussions with CIOs and business leaders at the enterprise level, just to learn how they feel about their businesses and where they are prioritizing their efforts. And so today we're hosting our first webinar of its kind. Well, at least since I've joined the Bullhorn family 3 years ago. This is an invite-only event for enterprise leaders in the space, and we have a lot to cover, but our real focus is to plan Q&A. So please be sure to use the question panel. In the meantime, if you have any questions, we will be gathering them throughout the discussion and covering as many as we can in the conclusion. So thanks again. All right, let's get into it. Looking at the COVID impact survey, if you could go to the next slide. The good news is that 30% of staffing and recruiting professionals report that their businesses are doing better than or as well as they were at this time last year. Now, the bad news is that 28% of respondents reported that their bottom line was down by at least 30%, which is no surprise given the current state. 45% of respondents specializing in hospitality and travel belong to this group. And then permanent staffing agencies were far more likely than their contract and temporary staffing counterparts to report a major decrease in business. We're looking at about 42%. Now, out of the top priorities from our COVID impact survey, if you look here, these that we have highlighted, these top 7 challenges are what we're going to be talking about today. And that's important because one major surprise from the survey was that candidate engagement came in as the 2nd highest priority. It was #1 the beginning of the year, and now it's still the 2nd highest for staffing firms for the remainder. We're looking at 36% actually, and it only fell behind managing client relationships. Now, obviously this is notable because there was speculation that the high unemployment rate would cause firms to focus less on the importance of candidate engagement, but in actuality, the data didn't bear that out. And it's also despite the fact that talent shortage went from being our #1 challenge for firms to not even registering in the top 5 challenges. The other 6 that we'll be covering, again, is improving management of client relationships, which is the #1, and then optimizing remote work, and employment brand development and marketing, automating and optimizing key processes, and reassessing business models. But let's talk about that optimizing remote work. Before COVID-19, remote adoption really wasn't widespread throughout the industry. We had some players who were using remote workforce, but largely it was not being adopted. Now that most agencies have introduced or expedited remote strategies into their business model, we asked, what changes do respondents expect to be permanent? What do they see as lasting? And these are the results. This is what some of your peers are thinking as it relates to them and their businesses. We're also seeing a lot of enterprise customers obviously look more and more at how they can better manage the remote workforce. And a major factor in how they're planning to achieve their goals is automation. This comes up in every roundtable discussion, some of our business reviews, et cetera, at the enterprise level, is how can we optimize our management of a remote workforce. So next slide, please. Oh, I think we skipped one there. There we are. So today, our data from Bullhorn shows that most firms are managing a smaller workforce. We know that they're managing that workforce remotely, and we also know that there's an increased focus on efficiency. So our data right now shows that these key metrics shown here are back on the rise. And that's important because a lot of our enterprise customers are looking at this moment now as an opportunity to get optimized before they get back up to those pre-COVID activity levels, which is a key reason why we're hosting this webinar. And it's also why we're focusing on this as an investment. So before we move forward, I want to ask everyone, how has COVID changed your firm's automation strategy? We'd love to poll the group. Alex, if you could pull that poll up. So how has COVID-19 changed your firm's automation strategy? Please answer. Either no change, less of a priority, increased priority, or already fully leveraging. We'll take up just a couple moments for folks to be able to share their answers. Okay, great. I think that we definitely have some answers here, and we will circle back with the results in a moment. So when we're looking at our customers' journey right now, it begins with digitization, right? And it's all about getting our teams on one platform, just making sure that there's one single source of truth that allows agencies, their teams, and their candidates and clients all a way to collaborate and drive efficiencies across the entire recruitment workflow. And we're talking from ATS through to pay and bill. Then there's automation, and that's the next step in the journey. With automation solutions, agencies can avoid the pitfalls of manual data entry, improving essential business KPIs like those we just shown from Bullhorn data, including submission rates, bill ratios, even MSP, SLAs, et cetera. But most importantly, automation enables agencies to make strategic business decisions based on data insights rather than that gut feel. And with automation, it paves the road for AI, which is where the real transformation results begin to shine. So let's see where all of you are in terms of automation. And then Jason will talk more about where the industry as a whole is in the automation journey. Alex, could you pull those results up for us? Wow, okay.
All
so
right.
we have 5% with an increased priority and 15% who are already fully leveraging.
That's great. That's thank you for that, Kendra. So now we're going to talk a little bit about kind of where automation is as a whole for the industry, and that's actually really almost exactly where we would think. So Mark, if you can just hit the next really quick here. This is where we are today for the industry as a whole. And if we look at those results, it looked like we had about 85% of people who have prioritized it, and then about 15% of people who are already fully leveraging automation on this call. So it's pretty neat. I don't know if somebody stuffed these results or stuffed the ballot box to get us to fit exactly onto this bell curve properly, but that's really about where the market is as a whole. So you can see we're kind of in the bottom left-hand corner here. And the great news, it's really good news for everybody. So the people who started early, they helped to progress this industry along. The early adopters helped to kind of mature the technology, make sure that it can handle most of the business's challenges and opportunities. And the great news is we're still in the very early stages of reaching the majority of the market. So this is still a great time to have an increased prioritization on automation, because you're not behind the market yet. You're catching up maybe to some competitors, but for the most part, standing it up is now a much easier process than it used to be, because a lot of the common best practices are already there, which we'll actually talk about some of those today, what other people are doing. And the technology is, again, really matured to a point where it's ready to handle even the largest firms' challenges and opportunities. So if we jump here, so this is kind of how we view automation within a business. So we've got kind of productivity, experience, and data health. You can see they're all kind of intertwining together. And our view is that all three of these have to be combined to really create the impact in an organization. So if we look at the candidate experience side, so creating a great candidate experience is something that every firm wants to do, as we saw. But it also, if we look over to the productivity side, recruiting and salespeople want to be more productive. We want, especially during this kind of time during COVID, we want to get as much production out of everyone internally as possible. So driving productivity for your sales and recruiting teams, and at the same time helping create a better experience for candidates and clients, those are two very important pillars. But as this visual kind of shows, really at the core of all of it is having good data. And automation not only helps to drive better data through the tools in automation, but also the increased communication and the collection of information through automation. So data health is at the core to making sure that the other two sides work as well. And on that note, we've got a slide here that shows kind of some of the outcomes of data health and automation. So if we look at most companies, about 87.5% of new applicants aren't engaged with, right? So just a little bit over 10% of new applicants ever hear anything. Well, if you've got automation in place, you can move that number to 100% with almost no lift from the internal recruiting team. And then almost 60% of the records in the ATS are out of date or inaccurate. Again, there with automation, you can either have the candidates update data or you can have the system dynamically update. And then the 20% of unproductive busy work, that's an area where once automation is fully ingrained into your business, you can expect that your recruiting and sales teams and everyone in the business will be really focused on high value tasks that are driving a relationship, driving business forward. And so what is automation from here? So really the simplest way is if this, then that. So here's an example of what that would look like from a new VMS job opening. So this could be anything. This is just one example. So new job opens in the VMS. That'll be your trigger. From there, all these other things can happen almost immediately. So the job will be added to the ATS, and that would be a tool like VMS Sync. Standardizing data from the VMS into your preferred format. So a lot of times the job comes in from a VMS and it has some of the information you need, but by looking at the description or the title, you can actually transform and pull out even more information to get it into your format. And then we can notify the recruiter about the job, and you can look at where the job's located, what type of category it is, and automatically route that to the right recruiter or recruiters. And you can even identify the top 10 candidates and start to message them. So that's kind of just a quick point example of where automation can be applied and how to think of the if this then that concept. But now we're going to walk through a story. So, the important thing to remember here is that automation doesn't remove the human element. It just allows it to be enhanced. So that's why here we want to focus out of into a personal story of a recruiter and a candidate and how that affects them. Because although automation can do a lot, it can't do everything. So let's meet these guys, and I'll let Mark talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely, thank you, Jason. So that's what we're going to walk through today. To Jason's point, is let's look at this new story, the new way of work with automation ingrained through a multitude of different Bullhorn Incorporated products. And so for this example, we're going to meet Taylor, who is a recruiter, and Nate, who is a Java developer looking for his next role. And so the great thing about where this journey starts is it starts with automatically cultivating a great candidate pool. So that starts with us having consistent automated outreach to a candidate pool in your ATS today that you've already paid for, you've already sourced, and making sure that you're getting the most out of those applicants, out of those candidates in your system. So we're going to send out content that's tailored directly to them, and tailored to them not only as jobs, but also as relevant content to them, keep them engaged. We're also going to keep their candidate data fresh as well. So asking them questions periodically on things that will help us update their record through surveys and forms. And all of this data is going to seamlessly be actionable within Bullhorn. So you're now going to have Taylor having visibility to all of these candidate interactions that are happening behind the scenes without her having to do anything. So we've now got a cultivated candidate pool that's engaged with us and that's ready for us to continue that partnership with them. And what that leads to is up to 76% of placements coming from your existing candidates. So taking that hard-earned sourcing work and putting it to use and not having candidates kind of just go stale within your database. And so now we've got a job coming in. So Taylor's got this new job from coming in from a VMS, coming in from Beeline. And the great thing is, probably many of you already know, is this starts with Bullhorn is automatically receiving this job through VMS Sync into the Bullhorn system. So in real time, sub 10 seconds, this job that was published on the VMS is already in Bullhorn and is already ready to be worked. To Jason's point, the automations about being able to notify a recruiter, notify an account manager that this job is in the system for their client, but maybe even more specifically, this type of job fits their type of recruiting skill set or round robin or what have you. All of those notifications happening automatically in the background. And I think where we take it the next step, and this is something that we're really excited about the next piece of this journey, is how do we learn from our candidates' interaction, learn from that candidate pooling and consistent asking of questions to these candidates, to not only learn how engaged they are with us as a company, but also to learn what types of roles it is that they're looking to fill. And so what you see here is that instead of Taylor having to worry about jumping into her applicant tracking system and running find matching candidates and doing a search for these candidates, we've actually already told her that in this email that there's a new job, it's assigned to you, that's all happened automatically. And we've also automatically decided that these 4 candidates fit the criteria to be the ideal candidates for this role. Based on engagement scores and what have you. And we've also automatically reached out to them via their preferred method, whether that be SMS, email, etc. So in real time, Taylor's receiving this position and just being notified that we're going to attempt to get some warm leads coming back from her existing candidate pool. Huge value there. And because we know Nate has been heavily engaged in campaigns and job searches, job matches on his profile, and his interaction with us has been a 99 score, he's going to bubble to the top. And you saw him at the top of that actual last email. And so what this means for us is that we can now automatically start that candidate engagement with him with a specific job in mind. So we can instantly send out a text message to start talking to Nate about this Java developer role that we have. All of this happening, real-time automation. He can respond back to this email, and with something like a Calendly or a service like that, we can automatically schedule an interview with Nate at this point. If it's a role where we really need to make sure we get some in-depth questions from him or have some personality assessments with him over the phone, but there's also the opportunity here for us to maybe follow up via email. So for some of us that have really high volume type roles or roles where maybe we know we just need to get this candidate kind of screened quickly and then into the VMS, we have the opportunity to just follow up with an email, ensure the candidate knows about the position that's here, but then also have the candidate complete screening questions. So we know what this job is, we know what the questions typically are from the VMS for this client, so we've preloaded that into an automation. As soon as this job came out, we've automatically asked those questions to Nate. So all of that happening again in real time without any human interaction. And so again, what this gives us is instead of those candidates that apply to something and don't hear back, we've now got 100% interaction with all inbound candidates. So huge for our brand, huge for obviously our engagement with candidates as well. But the automation train doesn't stop there. We move into getting this submitted back to a VMS. And when we talk about the VMS process, a lot of you guys have probably seen how tedious that can be with inputting all of these fields, having to search for the job in the system. Well, now with Beeline and Fieldglass, we have the ability to never leave Bullhorn. So Taylor goes into her Bullhorn system, looks at this job, finds Nate has already been attached, and finds that he has answered the knockout questions in a confirming fashion, and knows that he's ready to be submitted. She's going to just click on this position within Bullhorn, go through the form, never leaving Bullhorn, and submit the candidate. So all of this now happening in real time. She's just filling out some additional pieces of information that you probably don't have housed on your candidate record. And so from here, the candidate's now been submitted. Nate is in the VMS. Nate is awaiting feedback. And Taylor has traditionally not loved submitting candidates to the VMS because yes, there's low margin, but also probably more nerve-wracking to a recruiter. There's very little control and transparency on the process. So Taylor doesn't really know in typical fashion where Nate is. And so Taylor might typically ignore Nate's calls because she doesn't have an answer to give him on giving him an update on his status. But one of the great things about the way VMS works is that there actually are checkpoints throughout the process where Taylor's being notified via some automated email on the VMS side that the candidate that Nate has moved through the process. So what we can do now is tie automation onto the back end of that. And so automatically as Nate is shortlisted in the VMS, meaning that a hiring manager is now reviewing the resume, it's made it through the MSP stage, we can automatically send out a text message to Nate and let him know, congratulations, you have sparked some interest, and we have the hiring manager looking at your resume now. And then beyond that, we can look into the interview stage where, again, typically, if this comes up in the VMS, it's a back and forth process of having Taylor reach out to Nate, try to set up an interview. Now we can shoot him a text message and Nate knows right away, congratulations, you have an interview request that's coming. Be on the lookout for a phone call from Taylor. We see obviously the stats are very evident here that if we prompt with a text message before a phone call, we have a much higher response rate or a much higher pickup rate from Nate. And so now the great news is the client's excited to hire Nate. So they've made an offer, and that's come through in the VMS. And we can automatically let Nate know about this exciting news so that just in case Taylor is off doing another value-added step in her process with another candidate, this notification doesn't fall through the cracks. And then finally, I think this is probably the most exciting piece as we look at certainly redeployment opportunities, but in this case, our silver medalist candidates now don't have to have the last conversation they have with the recruiter be, sorry, you didn't get the position. We'll be on the lookout for something new for you. We're actually going to automatically look for the jobs that best match Nate's profile if Nate were to get rejected from this position, and send him an email saying that though he didn't get accepted for this position, here's 3 additional positions that you might be interested in. So again, huge benefits to the candidate relationship, but also to our ability to best leverage all of the candidates we have in our database and that we already have engagements going on with. So again, 100% of applicants know where they stand throughout this VMS process that had before been somewhat of a black hole. And so with that, Jason, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the long-term or the post-submission attributes of automation as well.
Awesome. Well, congrats to Nate for getting the job. Sorry, Angela, maybe the Java developer will be better. But for Nate, the next step of what we want to do is just make sure that, yes, we've placed him, but we want to make sure that all the information's still right on his profile. So the first thing we do as soon as that placement is made is we go change the status in Bullhorn to working for us or placed candidate or wherever your status might be. Then we move over the end date to the available date. So that way, whenever I go look for people who have just ended an assignment, I can see not only that they've ended or their status, but I can also see when they're available. And then from here, we want to make sure that we know what he's currently doing. So once someone's placed, we also want to copy over the job title to their current position title. So just keeping the information from the placement all the way up to date back onto the candidate so that kind of foreshadowing a little bit here, but we're probably going to want to hire Nate again in the future. So now we know that the information is up to date whenever people are going to look in Bullhorn. And then now as we move through the process, we want to get him off started on the right foot, right? Nate is very excited to start this new role. So we want to start to talk to him throughout the assignment, but most importantly, at the very beginning. So we'll, of course, talk about what the hiring and onboarding process will look like to remind them about their first day. And then on that first day, make sure that we send a message. Mark, you want to go ahead and make sure we send a check-in message to let them know that they're having that they made it to their first day, and that everything's okay. And then from there, continue to stay in touch with them. And this is an example of a very timely use case that many of our customers are using, which is just to do kind of the COVID-related health screening on behalf of their customers. So of course, you're going to want to make sure that Nate's happy, but in this time, we also want to make sure that Nate's healthy. So this is an area where people are starting to use the system in a very new way, but with the same tools. So again, we go all the way back up to the if this, then that concept. The exciting part about the way that these automation tools are built is that they're very flexible and allow you to be adaptable to whatever is happening. So if we go through, Nate's on assignment, and now he's starting the process of ending. So at this case, it looks like he's about 60 days from his end date. So we're going to notify his recruiter or account manager, whoever makes the most sense. And in that scenario, they can then either say, okay, I'm going to start reaching out to Nate and maybe the customer to make sure that that end date is correct or it hasn't been extended. Or if I already know it's been extended, this acts as a notification point to remind recruiters to go update that end date. This is something that's historically been bad with a lot of customers. Recruiters don't have a real incentive to update the candidate's placement end dates. And of course, you know, it's nice because we want automation to help redeploy this person. But from a management executive standpoint, you want to be able to forecast your revenue in a way that looks all the way down to the individual consultant and projects out their future end date. And if we can't rely on those dates, that makes that much more difficult. So now that your team has a reason, because it's going to help them to redeploy, you can expect that the automation, because it's happening, will actually drive different recruiting behaviors. But the last part of that was just automatically sending out messages to Nate about potential job openings. And then as we end, we're gonna, again, just like how whenever the placement started, as the placement's ending, we're gonna change their status to complete on the placement. We're gonna change the candidate status to available. And then we're gonna continue to get feedback, especially at the end of an assignment. And that could be the candidate, Nate. It could also be the client. I think in this case it was Adidas. And we can talk to the individual hiring manager to see how he thought Nate did. So all the parties that are related to this, you can get feedback throughout or just at the end. And then once you do that, again, that all triggers additional automation. So Nate just gave us a positive score. So now I can go reach out to the client to say how happy Nate is and how great that client is. So that just gives another touch point to the client, and also just keeps a pulse on Nate. And just doing that and then hearing if there are problems, the resolution, our customers increase their net promoter score by 29% just in the first 4 months of becoming a customer. So just focusing on that a little bit more helps to drive a better experience and make the candidates happier. All right, so then we talked about this a little bit. Automation can do a lot, but it can't do everything. Taylor was still a very important part of this in business, of this placement and this relationship between the candidate and the client. And automation, we really want to drive it to be even more of a relationship business, not to replace recruiters, but to refocus their time on things that really add value and really helps them to build a relationship. So if we look at that kind of workflow, what you see is that a lot of the same stuff happened that would have happened anyway, but it was automated. And then there's a lot of things that happened that wouldn't have happened had automation not been in place. But the recruiter is still doing very meaningful, important parts of this workflow. And that's what they can be focused on. And that's what makes people happy to come back to work and excited. So that's, that's really where we see automation and keeping a personal touch, is that it just really frees up your recruiter's time to do more. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit to talk about how AI is involved in this. So if we think about Kendra's journey that she showed us at the beginning, we talked about automation, and then we moved up to AI. So now what we showed throughout this process we showed a number of those emails. We showed like 3 potential job openings that a candidate might be interested in. Today, with Herefish, our customers are powering those jobs through our semantic match technology. So if we look here, we can see that there's many different ways that you can send that. So we show most of these examples. So a new applicant, if they apply for one job, suggests maybe other roles they might be interested in. When someone's rejected, if we've got a big database, re-engaging. So there's a lot of different places throughout the workflow that our customers are using these kind of dynamic jobs to drive people back to the website, drive them back through to either apply for more jobs or to point them to roles they might be more interested in. The next step of where we're going is the ability to, as soon as a job is open, to automatically match the best candidates to that job and send automated messages. That can happen today with marketplace partners, but that's one of the big areas where our system is currently in the process of learning and getting to the point where we feel comfortable that your team can start to roll that out. So the next question probably would be, so how do we get that sooner, right? Like, that's cool that you guys can include the dynamic jobs, but I want to automate more of the process. Well, the most important part of automating this is to make sure that we still create a good candidate experience. So what we're doing today, it's a pretty light touch where we're reaching out in all these different ways and suggesting potential job openings. And so what we're doing now is the model's continuing to learn. So through these behaviors of how they click on jobs, what happens with your recruiters as they work with these real candidates, we're learning from each of our individual customers through this kind of lighter level interaction about which jobs are the best and improving the model. And the goal of this first step, it absolutely solves a business need, but it's really to make sure that we can build trust with your recruiting team and make sure that you feel confident in the matches that we're creating before you start to do the more automated processes where it's taking over more. So the real interactions just really improve the model, but almost just as importantly as the model, it makes sure that when you roll this out, your team is going to trust the tool and believe that it's going to do the right thing on their behalf whenever we start to do more proactive outreach. So that's kind of the AI side and kind of what that process looks like. So now we're just going to kind of switch over briefly to talk a little bit about during kind of the COVID period, what's happening and what customers are doing. There's a page on the web, on the Herefish page. There's also a Bullhorn page that talks a little bit more about what customers are doing, how they're responding. So you can dig in more there. We're going to briefly cover some of that. So on this next slide, you'll see the adoption of Herefish throughout this and other automation has grown very quickly as COVID impacted globally. And the reason for that, again, nobody bought the tool specifically to handle a global pandemic, but because of the flexibility, they're able to take maybe a bad situation and create an opportunity in either starting to communicate more frequently with their candidates and clients about how they're responding and what steps are being taken with the firm, and also doing things like we kind of showed earlier, doing kind of a daily health check-in. We've got customers who their clients came to them and said, we need you to ask every single one of your consultants every day all the kind of the COVID screening questions. If you've been out of the country, if you have a fever, all those common questions. We need you to do that every day. And I know we have 2,000 people on site, but we need you to do that for everyone every day. And if you see someone with a problem, we need to make sure that we know about it and we take steps. And that's something that it's not that automation was a nice to have and is making recruiters more productive. It's just something that wouldn't have been able to have been done without automation. So that's why these tools, the flexibility in the tools is such an important part of being able to manage, in this situation, maybe a negative and turn it to a positive, but also in the future, there's going to be opportunities for business that we can't predict, but a flexible tool will help you take advantage of. So really, how it's changing the industry is it's just helping, you know, the relationships. We just, you know, focus needs to be back on the relationships, back into efficiency. You know, it's whenever kind of it's fluffy times, it's a little bit easier to just focus on kind of the top line rather than always focusing on efficiency, and just agility and adaptation. So being able to adapt to these changing times. And all of those things, we think automation is a massive step forward to helping you do that and do it quickly in a scalable way. And the last step of this, so, you know, a lot of this is really nice, and some of it may be theoretical, but what we wanted to do was look at actual Bullhorn data. So these charts and numbers you're seeing here are comparing Bullhorn customers versus Bullhorn customers that have automation in their business. And you'll see on the left, the top line numbers really say a lot. But if you look over to the right, and we've got a blog post that digs into these numbers a little bit more, but you'll see that not only did the customers with automation not go as deep into a trough, their recovery has regularly started earlier than the others. So again, there's a lot of obvious reasons whenever we look through kind of what you can do with automation that show logically that it should help, but the numbers show that it really does in all of the top line kind of most important metrics. So with that, Kendra, I think do we have some questions that we should talk through?
We most certainly do. We've had several come through, so we'll get right to it. The first one is, do these automation features that notify candidates of status updates only work if Bullhorn is synced with a VMS account?
So I can answer that one. So the benefit of it being synced with a VMS account is just that it goes directly from the VMS, and as soon as it happens in the VMS, it goes to Bullhorn, and then that change in Bullhorn triggers, in this case, Herefish. So we'll just say Herefish here. So if you're not using an automated VMS sync, you can absolutely trigger these automated updates based on status changes. So no, you don't need to have the VMS sync, or if it's one of the clients that aren't on the submittal side, just changing a status can automate the communications. And of course, you can also build logic around different business units having different business logic. So maybe you do want to update everybody on every single step on one side of the business, but on another side, you want to maybe preserve that and have it be more personal, or not do it at all.
Okay, great. Now another is, you said jobs are starting to rebound. Do you see an increase in jobs coming from VMS?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take that one, Jason. So as we look at our VMS data today, I think what COVID has given us is some interesting spikes in new job requisition volume, and that's certainly because we're cross industry, both with healthcare, non-healthcare, IT, light industrial, but also because we have clients who we've seen go somewhat dormant for the beginning phases of this pandemic, that have now kicked back in, and as much of our research has shown on even non-VMS jobs, have kicked back in with somewhat of an uncertainty of what the future holds. So that's driving additional contract labor demand, and a lot of this, yes, comes through VMS, and comes through VMS as some large projects are getting spun up by these Fortune 1000 companies using an MSP to do so.
Okay. How about, let's see here, can you automate client workflows, or is this just candidates?
I can take that one. Yes, the short answer is just yes. Longer, we focus a lot on the candidate interactions because there's so many different touch points throughout the process that could benefit from automation. But absolutely, all of the same concepts apply on the client side. So people use that for new leads, customers that are at risk because maybe they haven't sent or had new job openings or had submissions or placements within a certain time frame. You can even use it to make sure that your top clients are contacted on a very regular basis, or you're surveying them after every placement ends. So again, short answer is yes. Long answer is there's a lot that you can do on the client side, whether it's new business generation or kind of helping the account management process.
All right, Jason, that's a great tie into this next question. Are there pre-built automations? I don't know the answer to this one.
Yes. So within Herefish, we have it's called blueprints, which are always being updated. Right now, I think we probably have right around 40 or 50. And as things change or we release new functionality, those are always being updated. Or if customers are doing new things, such as the COVID example we gave, that goes in as a blueprint. So those are constantly changing and always there to just kind of with a couple of clicks to set up and then configure to make your own.
Okay. Now, just to clarify, is Herefish part of Bullhorn, or is it an automation tool that integrates with it?
Herefish is a tool that integrates very deeply with Bullhorn. We're part of the Bullhorn family, of course, but it's a separate tool that you would kind of make a decision and purchase outside of Bullhorn, if that answers that question.
Okay. Taking it over to VMS. How many VMSs does VMS Sync support these days?
Yeah, we are currently up to 98 VMSs that we integrate with on the job sync functionality, and we're continuing to grow out our VMSs on the submittal side, starting out with our two most high volume ones in Fieldglass and Beeline, which as we look at our systems account for roughly 70% of the overall VMS revenue that we see coming through our VMS Sync tool.
Great, okay. We have a few more here. So are customers using more communications than data automation since COVID started?
That's a good question. I would say I don't know the answer for sure offhand, but usually it's been a pretty balanced blend. A lot of our customers start with communication-based automation and then kind of mature into more data automations because they find usually they're still targeting the right people, but they start to see opportunities whenever they're trying to segment their information that the data is missing. So once they have the ability to further segment their information, they can then say, oh, well, we can't rely on our statuses regularly on candidates. But now that we can look at placement and submission information to change the status, or we can send a communication to have the candidate update their information, that's usually kind of the second phase of where people start. They start with some of the easy communication points and then move into the more strategic kind of data health initiatives.
Okay. I love this question. How do you keep the human touch?
Yeah, I can jump into that one again. I think this one is always important, and again, a lot of the times in the examples that we show, we show a lot of outbound communications that are automated, and that's really a decision for each company to say, do I want to outbound? Do I want to automatically send a message on behalf of the recruiter, or do I just want to remind a recruiter and have automation act as more of a safety net? And that's really, it kind of depends. There's some industries that do such high volume work that even the reminders could quickly become overwhelming. Whereas others that are focused on maybe, really a deeper relationship, it's just necessary for maybe higher tier type roles, they absolutely spend more time just staying on top of their recruiters and reminding them to do things. The best recruiters already do it, but most recruiters easily forget or are more focused on driving that new placements than maybe staying engaged with their existing consultants or proactively building their pipeline. So they just use it as a safety net to help remind recruiters to do the actions rather than send the automated message.
Now, someone was paying attention with this one. So in one of your slides, SMS was used to market a job to candidates. In my system, all candidates are opted out of SMS by default. Now, how can Herefish help with the explicit opt-in to SMS after a candidate has applied? And how do you deal with legacy candidates who are opted out?
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of the data automation, let's talk about the legacy ones first. So if we know that there are some candidates who really shouldn't be opted out, you can always use an automation to go update information in bulk. But sometimes it's difficult to figure that out. So one way that people adjust that is by they send the messages and have the candidate ask the candidate again for their permission to send SMS messages. And then once we've got that, again, we just showed the outcome for the recruiter, but when building these, at each point, whenever a message is being sent, we can always look at the candidate and their preferences to decide how to send a message, whether they prefer SMS, email, or again, going back to the personal touch, maybe they should have a phone call. They prefer a phone call. So at each step, you have the ability to decide, based on a candidate's profile, what method do you want to send? And of course, you can always make sure that that's right by asking them to update those preferences.
All right, great. Well, I think that is all of the questions that have come through. So from here, if anyone has any other questions or feedback for us, we definitely want to hear it. So please note that you will be receiving a survey, because obviously we greatly appreciate your feedback, and that will include a link to the recording of the event. And if there are any other questions related to our automation journey here at Bullhorn or anything else, please don't hesitate. You can contact me directly and I can put you in touch with the right folks. It's kendra.cato@bullhorn.com. But thank you so much. We all know that you have busy schedules, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us. And thank you to our presenters today as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.